I absolutely love that. I love adventure travel, and I was so excited to have this opportunity. You got to be willing to get on a Zodiac, and as long as we were in the inland sea, it was pretty flat. But there was one stop we made where there was a lot of wind and a lot of waves, and we were warned shortly before we got on the Zodiac, hey, people, you're going to get a little wet on this because there's some waves. And at one point, we turned a corner in the Zodiac, and a wave came completely over us, and we got drenched.
Oh, so not a little wet.
A lot wet. That was a lot wet. It's that type of traveler that will take it in stride and not fuss about it. Just say, oh, well, it's part of the journey, part of the fun.
Thank you for joining us on Passport Diaries, a travel podcast by TravelStore. And that was Katie Cadar, today's guest, who is joining us to talk about her recent trip to Japan. And I will say, if there is anyone that has earned the title World Traveler, it is Katie, because she has been so many places. I mean, not only did she just get back from Japan, but she also just got back from Mexico. She has lived in Sweden and traveled all over Europe. She is an Africa specialist. She's done really cool things. Like, she has kayaked in French Polynesia. She's gone tiger spotting in India. She's an expert in adventure travel. I mean, she has done it all, and she's just a really great person to talk to with some really fascinating and interesting stories. So it was really cool that she could sit down with us and talk about her recent trip to Japan. So this trip to Japan was part of a collaboration between Travel and Leisure and Ponant Cruises. And it was for Ponant's brand new itinerary to Japan that goes to some really, really hard to reach places. Definitely not on the beaten path places. Like, she was talking about how most of the time they needed to take a Zodiac into these little tiny villages because there was no other way to get to them. They don't have restaurants. They don't have hotels. They're just not set up for tourism. So she also talks about the reception that the passengers of the ship got when they arrived in these places, because it was such a treat for everyone. They don't see tourists a lot. A lot of people have never been to these villages because they're so hard to reach. Just really, really cool to hear about. And then she contrasts that with talking about the experiences that she had in the bigger cities that most travelers know, which are Kyoto, Osaka, and the vibrancy of those cities and the energy, and how they're very different experiences, both great, both authentic and Japanese culture experiences, but very different. We have a video portion of this podcast, so every now and then you'll hear little snippets of music or city noise, and that is coming from photos and videos from Katie that she shared that we have in the video portion of our podcast. So if you can, definitely check it out, because it's really cool to see what she's talking about and her on-the-ground experience and views there. So definitely see it if you can. So thanks so much for being with us. I think you're really gonna love Katie's stories as much as I did. So much fun. We covered so much ground. So let's just get to it. I know that you've been everywhere. Have you been to Japan before?
I was in Japan once about 10 years ago for 4 nights. I was in Japan 2 nights in Tokyo and 2 nights in Kyoto. So I've always wanted to go back.
And so actually on this trip, it was kind of all new places then.
It was all new places, except I had been to Kyoto before, and I returned at the end of this trip.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Well, I just kind of want to dive in because I have never been to Japan. Obviously, it's one of those bucket list places for me. But in particular, this trip that you took, can you tell me who you went with and for what purpose? Because that was kind of unique as well.
So I serve on the Travel and Leisure Travel Agent Advisory Board, and they are collaborating with Ponant Cruises, which is a smaller French company. And Ponant has a cruise that is an expedition cruise in Japan. And it does this very off the beaten path, hidden places in Japan that are very hard to get to. And I was asked to go on Ponant and experience this cruise and report back to Travel and Leisure.
You're not kidding when you say off the beaten path, because I pulled up the map because I don't have a great concept of distance. You covered some serious ground.
We did. We flew to Osaka, and we spent a night there, and Osaka was a fascinating city. I actually would love to go back. It was much cooler than I had even thought. From there, we boarded the ship and we sailed for 8 nights. And we were in the inland Seto Sea of Japan, which is something that is very hard to get to if you're not on a ship. And in
Yeah.
this area, there are so many miles of coastline and tiny islands, and it's just scattered with these tiny villages. So we were so lucky to be on a ship and be able to stop in some of these villages. I had several meetings with the Japan coordinator for Ponant Cruises, and he spent 3 years developing this itinerary. So in order to
Wow.
plan this itinerary, he went in person to these little villages. He met with the mayor, he met with the villagers, he sat down and drank beer with them and, hashed it out and basically planned where the ship could stop. We had 150 passengers,
Oh,
so a
really small.
very, very small ship. But to bring 150 people plus crew into a village can be disruptive. So he wanted to make sure the villages would want us there and would be welcoming and would share some of their culture with us.
These villages that you went to, like, kind of give me an idea of size. I guess in in
Oh,
LA
so
terms.
small.
So
Like
small.
some were just a few streets. It was like going back in time because some of the houses were from the Edo period and wooden houses, very ancient temples, shrines,
Oh.
very authentic and
Mm.
beautiful gardens. So it was very special. If you were to get to these villages not on a ship, it would be very, very difficult. It would mean flying to a city somewhat close, then driving, then taking a ferry. And then once you get to the village, they don't have hotels there. They
Yeah.
have convenience stores and some grocery stores, but I didn't see any restaurants except some, walk in and buy an ice cream or a beer. So
Oh,
they
wow.
aren't even set up for tourism. They're not set up to have really outside visitors. So it's like going back into the time when Japan was a rather closed society. Although we would be walking down a beautiful street with these wooden houses on either side and a shrine in the distance, and suddenly a brand new car would drive past. So the villagers do have modern conveniences, but it's a very remote area.
How was the reception when you arrived?
It was amazing. It was so much
Oh,
fun.
good.
This was an expedition. So we
Mhm.
arrived in these villages on Zodiacs.
For those of us who don't know much about ships, what is a Zodiac?
So it's a small boat with inflatable sides. You sit on the inflatable side and you hang on to the rope, and they've got the outboard motor. Uh, the expedition team, they would drive the Zodiac. So they're standing up driving the Zodiac and we're bumping along over the
Oh.
waves, and sometimes we got quite wet. So then we'd get to where they docked and we would climb out of the boat. They would have like people on either side to hold our arms so we wouldn't fall in the water.
Oh my God.
The first village we arrived in was called Tomonura, and they have cement steps that go down into the sea so that when the boats come up, they can dock there, and or they can get as close as they can to let people climb up the stairs. And they actually put a white fabric down so that we wouldn't slip and slide on the
Aw.
steps. And at the top of the steps, there was a whole bunch of little children waving flags and singing, and their teachers and parents were smiling. And in these little villages, there is not much English spoken.
Oh.
So we had our expedition leaders, and some of them spoke Japanese. And so we had the option of going with one of the expedition leaders to do the walk around the village. And they had things planned, like in that village, they had a samurai sword demonstration by two masters of samurai. It
Oh.
was very, very cool.
What does that entail?
Oh, they were in their traditional dress with the swords, and they faced each other, and it's very formal where they bow and then one pulls out the sword and they demonstrate how they would fight, like
Oh.
their postures. And there was a translator and a person explaining what they're doing, and it was fascinating. Yeah. And that village, they also had a calligraphy demonstration where these ladies were all sitting at this table, one after the other, and you'd come in and they would show you symbols and they'd say, what do you, they would say it in Japanese, and we had a translator, like, what do you want? And you could pick a symbol of happiness or love or travel, and then they would
Oh,
paint it in calligraphy and then give it
oh,
to you. So it was
oh.
very sweet. And I actually didn't want to wait for the leader because the people were taking so long, coming in on the Zodiacs. So I started walking we had a photographer with us, with the photographer and with my partner. And we just started wandering around in the village. And almost every corner we found another shrine.
Oh, wow.
Just beautiful. And we were so fortunate. We were there in uh, mid-April.
Hmm.
And the cherry blossom season is usually the last week of March, but it was late. So we were so lucky to see cherry blossoms absolutely everywhere.
Oh,
So flower petals, and then the wind would catch them, and the flower petals would just rain down. It was gorgeous.
and that was a happy coincidence, like
Oh,
not
it was.
expected.
I mean, I was
Yeah.
hoping we would catch it, and I thought we
Hmm.
might be just behind it, but we were right in the middle of it.
So that was the first village that you went to. How many did you say you stopped? What was the journey that you took?
We started with Osaka, where we boarded, and that is a huge, bustling city.
Mm.
And in Osaka, I spent some time in this district called Dotonbori, which is just not to be missed. It's just this wild place with neon everywhere and people taking pictures and street vendors and street food and just so much fun. And it was full of not only tourists, but a lot of locals. So
Oh,
it
yeah.
just was this fun place to be. The next day we went to Osaka Castle. So you get
Mm.
the opposite. You get the beautiful, serene, authentic, gorgeous castle that was surrounded by flowers and cherry blossoms. It was beautiful. So from this huge city, we boarded this ship that was rather small, but now you're on a ship. Ponant is a French company, so we had everything in French and in English. We had a
Oh.
lot of nations represented on board. So among the 150 people, we had Americans, we had French, Germans, Italians, New Zealand, Australia. There were a lot of different nationalities on board. I absolutely love that. I love adventure travel, and I was so excited to have this opportunity. You got to be willing to get in a Zodiac, and as long as we were in the inland sea, it was pretty flat. But there was one stop we made where there was a lot of wind and a lot of waves, and we were warned shortly before we got on the Zodiac, hey, people, you're going to get a little wet on this because there is some waves. And at one point, we turned a corner in the Zodiac, and a wave came completely over us, and we got drenched.
Oh, so not a little wet.
A lot wet. That was a lot wet. When we finally got off that Zodiac, there were people waiting for us with towels. But it was the rest of the day, we're all sloshing around with water on our shoes and wet clothing. But
It's
it's that type of traveler that will take it in stride and not fuss about it. Just say, oh well, it's part of the journey, it's part of the fun. On our trip, we only had two actual docks. We had the rest of it with
Oh,
Zodiac.
wow. Okay, so any of these villages, well, most of these villages that you visited, you needed to take the Zodiac in
All of
because
them.
they were,
We
yeah.
docked in Nagasaki because that's a city, and we went there, of course, for the history of Nagasaki. And we docked in South Korea and Busan.
Mm,
And of course, in Osaka, we were docked. And then at the end, we ended the trip in Kagoshima, which is a city, and we docked there. But the rest of the village stops,
yeah.
we were in Zodiacs.
What
That
a
was
what an
great.
arrival.
No, it was
Yeah.
great. And the ship it has a swimming pool that's heated.
Mhm.
I didn't get in it because the weather was a little chilly, but some people did. And the back of the ship, when you're at anchor or dock, the back of the ship can lower down and it creates a floating marina. So
Mm.
that's where we boarded the Zodiac. We would go down and get on the Zodiacs from the floating marina. If the ship is in warm weather climate, you can get off that and into a kayak and paddle off.
After the first stop, after the first village, where did you go next?
We went to a place where there were two villages that were fairly close together. The first one was Mitrai, and that was just a lovely stop. That one, they set up for us different experiences, and they just said, here's a map, walk around.
Ah.
but look for these things. So we're wandering down a tiny little narrow street and we hear music. And we stopped and everybody gathered. Well, and we were like in clumps of people because we all were kind of spread out. So there was a young man playing an ancient instrument, a little stringed instrument in this very traditional Japanese music. We all sat down and there was a concert. He just kept
Oh.
playing and it was beautiful. And then, you keep wandering and we come across a temple full of flower blossoms and, gorgeous. And keep walking, and a lady comes out of her store and offers us cookies
Oh.
and greets us. And she's in her formal kimono. And then there were three ladies doing flower arranging. So they gave us each these little bamboo holders and helped us choose flowers to make an arrangement. So apparently it's traditional to welcome people, you would put flowers on your front door. And as we walked through the village, we saw all these front doors with flowers on them.
Oh.
So it was pretty charming because we got back to the ship and everybody was sticking the flowers on the door of their cabins.
Oh, that's precious.
It was really, really lovely. And then we went back to the ship for lunch because there are no restaurants. So
Oh,
we were told, like, you are dining on the ship. So now we
yeah.
have to get on the Zodiac at a certain time to go back and have lunch on board. And then about 2 o'clock, we came to the next village. And this village had so many gardens
Mm.
and it just was beautiful. They did a tea ceremony for us in one of the gardens, and there were a lot of different museums. So you could go through the pottery museum with the ancient pottery of Japan. And
Wow.
there were some art museums, but actually my boyfriend's favorite was the insect museum.
I love that that's a thing.
It was a thing. It was really funny. One village we came into, they had these booths set up when we arrived. And first they greet us with flags waving and, the song. And then
Oh.
we come around the corner and they have all these booths set up and they're like, try this, try this, try this. So they had all these local little delicacies that you could try with from tea to, little fish, which I don't eat, but you could eat that or little cakes. But they also had little stores where you could walk in and buy a soft serve ice cream, which I did several times. So I would buy some ice cream and then somebody else would see me and go and, oh, like down there,
Got
they'd go get it as well. But
it.
there was one village I will tell you about where the one where the all the booths were set up. So this village is quite famous in the southern part of Japan
Mm.
because Japan was a closed society for so many years. And the lords ruled each village. And in I think the 1500s, the Portuguese finally landed in the south of Japan and they actually brought
Mm.
in Christianity. And this was not appreciated by the lords because it threatened them. But in this little pocket in the south of Japan on these islands, the villagers protected anybody's belief. So in one village that's very small, there is a Catholic church, there is a Shinto shrine, and there is a Buddhist temple, and all
Oh.
respect each other. And so our mission on that village was to visit each one, and
Mm.
each one had something for us to do, whether it was ring the bell and pray or, be respectful and listen to that Buddhist priest talking. And in the
Mm.
Catholic Church, they had musicians with Renaissance costumes and Renaissance instruments.
Oh,
And
wow.
they did about a 30-minute concert for us with singing and recorders and these, and I don't know if it was a lute or what instrument it was, and a spinet. And it was beautiful.
Oh.
So they did that for us. And
Oh.
then and then they told us we went back to the ship for lunch, of course, and then came back to the village because there was a dance performance that was going to happen. So we came back and there were musicians playing the very typical Japanese music with singers and the that kind of tune that is kind of hard for Western ears.
Mm.
And they're
Mm.
singing this in those I don't know how to describe it. It's like these minor keys.
Yeah.
And then the ladies came out in their kimonos and they did this dance and they're singing at the same time and they were having so much fun. And
Oh.
then they asked everybody to come up and dance. And so a lot of the people from the ship, suddenly they're in this circle dancing with these ladies, which was just great to see. And then to top it off, they told us a celebrity was coming. So we had to wait for the celebrity. And the celebrity was a white panda bear, which was this guy dressed in the costume of Kumamon, which is the mascot of this area of Japan. And it was just hilarious to see this. Looks like a cartoon character running in costume, life
Oh,
size, high-fiving everyone and hugging and shaking hands. And it was just a lot of fun.
that's so cool.
And then to top
Um,
off that day, as we got in the Zodiac, the final Zodiac to go back to the ship, one of the women from the village came out and stood at the dock and sang to us.
oh,
So we,
wow.
we were a big thrill for the village.
Yeah. Yeah, because as you said, this is not an easy to reach place.
Right.
So special for everyone.
Very special. The last village we went to, the last stop we made was where we got wet. The,
Hmm.
the
The wave.
where the wave came. And one of the special things was that there were these three islands connected by bridges, like long bridges.
Oh.
And it was very dramatic. And we really went there because of the scenic beauty of the area, because it was quite different. We went in the Zodiac, you went by this giant rock that looked like Napoleon's face. So they called it Napoleon's Rock. Do you see Napoleon's Rock? Do you see the resemblance? So we and around the corner from Napoleon's Rock was where the wave hit us.
Did it really look like
It
Napoleon
did. I
or
have pictures. It
really?
did look like
Oh, great.
Napoleon. So we started in the buses and they would divide us up by language. We had the
Mm,
French speakers and we had the English speakers and the German speakers. And so we kind of were divided. But we'd arrive at these places one after the other so we wouldn't overwhelm people. And the first stop was a museum, but as you walked into the lawn in front of the museum, there were local ladies setting up, giving us matcha tea and different
oh,
kinds of cookies and the bean paste candy. And nobody spoke
love
any
it.
English, but they were all like offering this to us.
Oh,
And it was so charming. And then we went inside, and of course, everywhere in Japan, you have to take your shoes off.
yes.
So I sat down on a little chair to take my shoes off, and I realized that my tennis shoes had totally filled up with water from the wave. So now I'm in wet socks. And then we walked
Oh,
along a beach and then back to the bus, and then we go to the next area, and it was a viewpoint, and it was spectacular. Just the
mm,
beauty of it, the greenery, the vegetation, and then these long bridges. We
oh,
finally ended up at a little town and we were treated with entry to the village chief's house.
oh,
So we got to go through this beautiful, organized Japanese garden into his home. Of course, sit down and take your shoes off, come in, and they had set up chairs, and there was a young man playing an instrument that was this stringed instrument, just beautiful. And they passed out tea and cakes. So it was really, really fun to see that home. And then we were back to the ship.
you mentioned this that in a lot of cities there's some issues of over tourism and crowding. So what a big part of the purpose of this was to kind of help design an excursion to get to know like authentic Japan and Japanese culture and the people away from kind of these really, really inundated areas.
Exactly. This was a
Yeah.
completely away from the crowds moment. Authenticity, local culture, getting to know people smiling at you when you couldn't speak their language and they couldn't speak yours, trying to
Yeah.
stumble through some Japanese phrases, trying to make yourself understood. And when I would go and buy ice cream, it was just me going to buy the ice cream and smiling and laughing and going through my Japanese coins to pay for it. And they enjoyed our presence. They don't have tourism, and we
Hmm.
loved being on in these very remote areas. And every stop, there was something special happening that they did for us.
Oh.
So it was really magic. Uh, we made one stop that basically it's the maritime law. you stop in a different country to make it an international sailing. So
Mm.
we started and ended in Japan, but we needed to go to a different country to fulfill this rule. So we went to Busan in South Korea. So that stop was the only one. You have the shock of a great big city. After the
Oh.
tiny remote villages, you come to this gigantic city. And we were taken to what they told us was the best attraction for us to see in Busan, which was a temple.
Hmm.
So we get on the buses and we have a local guide explaining things in Korea. And we drive about 40 minutes, get out the buses, and now we're walking through a major tourist trap.
Mm.
There were hundreds of people,
All at this temple.
hundreds. They were all coming to see this. They were tourists. There was a big cruise ship in town. Busan is
Oh.
a stop on many itineraries just because of its location and because of the requirement that you have to hit another country. So there was another big cruise ship. We're a tiny cruise
Mm.
ship. There was a big cruise ship in. And all of these tourists, plus bus tours, they're funneled
Mm.
through a path where there are vendors on both sides trying to sell food and trinkets and souvenirs. And, it's mass of people feeding into the temple area. And then your local guide is trying to tell you about certain sculptures and what the meaning is. And you've got people all around you, and then a souvenir shop to your right, and people on your
Mm.
left. And it's like, oh my God, I'm in the world of mass tourism again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that
That
was a shock to the system after what we've been experiencing.
was this stop mid-journey or at the end?
It was toward the end,
Okay. So
but we
yeah,
had
the
one
contrast.
stop we couldn't make because the wind came up and the sea became very rough. And we were
Oh.
supposed to stop in one more place in Japan, and we were not able to dock. They even brought tugboats out, and the tugboats tried, and it was impossible. It wasn't safe. It was
What was
just too rough.
what was that like watching?
It was
I
wild.
mean,
We're sitting in the dining room having breakfast, watching the tugboats trying to pull us, and we're like, okay. So then the captain announced we're not going to dock. So he sailed
Mm.
back to the inland sea where it was calm.
Hmm.
So we had a really nice day at sea, which I actually love a day at sea. Otherwise, it's docking every day and you're out and about every day. But having a day at sea gives a chance to, visit with people. And we spent some time with other passengers just chatting. And, there's a spa on board and there's a
Oh.
beautiful sauna with a window that looks out to the sea that's just spectacular. So,
Mm.
it's not a waste of time. And they also did some exciting things for us that day. One of the expedition leaders gave a talk on the history of Japan, on a little piece of
Oh.
history. Another one who is Japanese but lives in California right now, she did a Japanese language lesson and then printed out a list of words.
Oh.
We had a meditation, and I went to the meditation, and it was done in a place on the ship that's really special. They have a bar called the Blue Eye, and the Blue Eye is below decks, and it's in the front of the ship, and it's underwater. So it has a big window in there, a big oval shaped window that looks like the eye of a whale. That is, you're looking at the water. They have microphones where you can hear the water sounds. If you happen to have fish sounds out there, you would hear that too. And
Oh.
then the inside is painted dark blue, but there are white ribs like the ribs of a baleen whale.
Oh, wow.
Very interesting shape, all curves, and then there's a bar down there. Of course, when we did meditation, the bar was not open. Oh, and on one wall, they have projected like floating animated jellyfish.
Oh.
So it's very calm. So the one of the entertainers on board, there were three dancers, and they did double duty as, doing a stretch class every day, and they did the meditation and they did a yoga. So one of them took us, I think there were like 15 of us, and we went down and we had a meditation in the Blue Eye.
I don't know what that would feel like. Like, did it feel like you were surrounded by water, or did it feel more like you were floating? Was it oppressive or kind of
No,
liberating?
it was interesting. We weren't really moving much. They don't
Okay.
open it in a rough sea.
Mm,
They
okay.
only open it at certain times. So I went down for meditation and I went down one other time, and then they did a show. And actually the day we were sitting, we had the sea day. the three girls who are the entertainers did a show called The Little Mermaid, and they went down and
Oh,
danced. So it's an interesting place to go, but it's a
yeah.
little bit weird because I don't like submarines, and I knew I was underwater.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
It's kind
down,
of,
like you walk downstairs and then down another flight, and then you're there.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's kind of like going like in London on the tube and realizing how far down you are,
Yeah,
realizing how much
yeah,
water is around you.
right, right.
Yeah. When you were at sea, what other activities or locations were there on board?
So my favorite area on all ships actually is what is called the observatory lounge. Every ship has an observatory lounge. It's in the front of the ship and it's a bar with panoramic windows all around. So you've got this gorgeous view, all day long there's a beautiful view, especially at sunset.
Mm-hmm.
In the bar, I mean, this is a small ship, so it wasn't that big, but there
Mm-hmm.
was a bar. You could get cappuccinos in the morning and you could get cocktails or wine in the evening and snacks. But there was a library of books. There were games.
Ooh.
There was backgammon and chess and cards and, pick up any game and sit down. Lots of nice, comfortable seating. So I would gravitate down there and have a beverage and sit down and talk to people.
Mm.
I mean, this particular cruise attracts like-minded people.
Yes.
So it's very easy to strike up a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was that was interesting meeting a lot of the other passengers on board.
What were some of the specialties of the people who were giving the talks before you would go to the village, or I think I saw some were studying like microbiology or
Mhm.
something like that. Yeah.
They had an opportunity to have dinner with expedition leaders, and you'd sign up for it. And they'd have like
Mm.
a table of six people with one or two expedition leaders. So I had dinner one night with a married couple. The husband is French, and he was one of our leaders, and he is an amazing expert in birds. Any
Oh.
bird and anything, and you'd point to a bird in the sky, and he would tell you what it was and everything about it. So you could ask him anything about birds, and he knew the answer. And
Wow.
his wife is a student and she's studying microbiology. So she's getting her doctorate, but in the meantime, she's working on board and having
Uh,
just the time of her life. But
yeah.
fascinating, fascinating people.
I do want to hear a little bit more about Nagasaki.
Well, we were excited that Nagasaki was on the itinerary because it is so significant in history.
Yeah.
And Rio, the director, talked about it the night before that we would be stopping. We had been in Busan, and now we come back, and so we had to clear customs. There's always the formality of the customs when you enter different countries, and so they had
Mm.
customs officials on board in the morning. And he said, nobody's off the ship until you clear customs, so we're not going to do the excursion to Nagasaki until the afternoon. So we come into Nagasaki, and when we cleared customs, three of us got off the ship before the excursion because we could. And we
Mm.
walked around and went to a department store, and everything is brand spanking new and, super modern and beautiful. And then come back to the ship and join the excursion. So we drove out about 40 minutes to the museum about the bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And emotionally, I was not prepared. I thought, okay, it's going to be hard, but I didn't realize how hard. The museum it has a huge emotional impact, and it affected all of us. No matter where we came from, we were silent. We were walking through, they have a mock-up of the bomb itself. They have
Wow.
photographs of the devastation. They have photographs of the explosion. They have remnants of burned clothing and twisted wreckage. And I could not even speak. It felt extremely heavy, like a weight. And I walked outside and stood in the sun and just looked at some of the trees and flowers just to catch my breath. And then they got us back on the bus and they took us to the memorial park.
Mm.
This has some statues. And the most impressive one is this huge statue with, all, I think it's made of iron or stone. I don't remember, but the person has the finger pointed to the sky. And then you come through the rest of the sculptures, and there are people like mothers holding children, and you're supposed to be uplifted here. And there's a beautiful fountain. And then you keep on going and you come to the place they call the hypocenter. The bomb exploded in the air, but right above the hypocenter.
Oh.
So this is the place where it hit. I mean, although it exploded right above it. And there's this big black iron sculpture it reminded me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, that big structure. And then there are
Mm-hmm.
concentric circles around it. And then there's grass. And I couldn't step toward it. It was really hard.
Wow.
And we all went back to the buses, and then they took us to an area that's a reconstructed village of what things used to look like. Like, this was ancient. This is what once was here. And it was very hard. And everyone felt it. So going back to the ship, everyone was kind of silent, and we felt like we were not prepared for that.
Yeah.
So I talked to Rio, and I said, I wish that when you did the talk about what's going to happen the next day, because every night they did a briefing for the following day, I wish
Mm.
I'd been better emotionally prepared, just with this is what you're going to see, to get myself more emotionally ready for it. I didn't want
Yeah.
to not do it. I definitely wanted to do it. I definitely wanted to see it. But it was a very hard day. No matter what country you were from, it affected everyone. My photographer was Chinese. She grew up in China, although she lives in
Mm-hmm.
Italy, but she was talking about the impact on the Chinese because that war was so brutal to China.
Yeah.
And she said, that bomb ended the war, but did they need to drop the second bomb?
And yeah. Yeah.
And learning that Nagasaki was not the original target, it was sort of happenstance.
Mm.
A different target was planned, and because of weather and clouds, they went to Nagasaki instead. So the amount of devastation by kind of almost a mistake,
Yeah.
it was just really hard to think about.
Yeah. So then, last stop, and you ended up spending a couple days in Kyoto, right?
Yes, I really wanted to go back to Kyoto because I was there for such a short time. And this, again, it was only 2 nights. But it was now I'm off the ship. I'm away from the group. I'm just my partner, myself, and he had never been in Kyoto. So I was
Oh.
hoping to show him, some of the main sites. And
Mm-hmm.
I had never been to, the Thousand Torii Gates. I'd never seen them. So I really wanted to see that. So I booked a guide, and there is nothing better than having a good guide. People say, oh, you can do it on your own. Oh, it's easy. But the guide has the knowledge and can make it a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
So we had our guide, we spent 2 nights. So the first night in, my boyfriend loves Japanese food, and he felt that on the ship it wasn't Japanese enough. Now we
Hmm.
were on a French ship with a French chef.
Oh.
So I was happy.
Yeah, not a problem.
I don't eat fish anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I was extremely happy. And they had Japanese food every night as one option. But
Yeah.
Josh kept saying it wasn't authentic enough for him, except the day that Rio had a local chef from one of the villages come on board with all the fresh fish, and they made sushi on board. So they did
Oh.
that. But now we're in Kyoto. So the first night we found a very authentic little Japanese restaurant where there were maybe 4 tables, and you sit on the floor on tatami mats at low tables. Now, me with a fish allergy, luckily, Josh had prepared a card for me in Japanese that said I cannot eat. I'm allergic to fish and shellfish. I had to
Oh,
hold up
that's
the
great.
card, no English. So I pointed at the picture of the chicken teriyaki, So that was fun. And he had sashimi and the biggest smile on his face. So the next day, our guide came, and we had her from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon.
Wow, great.
So this was great. And happened, she's from India, from Bangalore. She's been living in Kyoto, studying at University of Kyoto in cell death. That's like her specialty. It's very esoteric. And she speaks all these languages, brilliant young woman. And I told her exactly what we were looking for, and she managed it beautifully. So she took us walking and we went down beautiful scenic streets with this river and weeping willows. And it was a Sunday, so people were dressed, no, it was a Saturday. So people were out dressed up like they're on dates. And a lot of the young people would dress in traditional outfits to go on a
Oh,
date. So
oh,
you'd see a couple like all over the place with the kimonos and the whole traditional dress. So it was so picturesque. The first temple she took us to, we were the only ones there in
wow.
Kyoto with massive over-tourism happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we walked in Guyane and now we hit the crowds, but it was really fun. And I told her I like shopping, so we were poking in and out of stores and I bought quite a few things. You can buy, the women might use a kimono only once and then they'll get rid of it. And so a lot of the shops rent them so these young women can dress up for the day or tourists can dress up for the day, but they also repurpose them and make kimono jackets.
Oh,
So I
cute.
bought a lot of kimono jackets to give for present.
Ah, that's brilliant.
So that was fun. But we interacted a lot. I mean, one thing about shopping, it's not just about the buying, it's about the interaction.
Hmm.
So we passed a store where they were selling soaps and we got into it with the soap and the girls selling the soap and took pictures of them and they're laughing at us and it just was a lot of fun. And we ended up going to a temple that I wanted to see. That's a very major temple. Now we're in a sea of people, a sea,
Ooh.
thousands. And I said, I can't, it's too much. And she said, come with me. She walked us through the exit up a street where everyone's coming out and around a corner where we could get this beautiful view of what was happening at this temple without being in the midst of the crowd. So the value of a guide. When we went to the Torii gates, we took a taxi to get there. And the taxi is trying to make its way through the sea of people. There were so many people, and now it's afternoon. It was like scary amount of people. And
Wow.
Josh was like, we can't go here. It's too many people. And she said, no, no, it's okay. She took us a different way around where we could get beautiful pictures and get the whole feel of it and feel like we're in the forest and hear all these gates, but we're not in the sea of people. And then she took us down some beautiful little streets and we stopped in a traditional restaurant for lunch and we had a great time talking and sharing and visiting the city. So the city is beautiful, but it was in the middle of, cherry blossoms were still blooming.
Oh, yes.
So we have
Yeah.
that. We have probably people on spring break, people on their spring trip trying to catch the cherry blossoms. Lots
Mm-hmm.
of tourists walking around the temples with, the lollipop people following.
Yeah.
But to have just the two of us with one guide who knew her way around this place was so valuable.
Yeah.
So I love the city. It's quite a large city, but to have a guide is the way to navigate.
Any other highlights that you just were caught by surprise or anywhere that you'd want to go back to?
I think that my favorite thing was just the reception we had in the villages. The
Mm-hmm.
way that people were so happy to see us. And I was so excited to be climbing up that Zodiac and seeing these little kids waving flags and their parents smiling at us. And, just the reception we had and the openness that these villages had to welcome us was the best. I mean, people are people. And if you reach out to them and you smile and you try to understand some of their language and their culture, then things just open up.
It was really great hearing about Katie's super unique trip to Japan. And fear not, Katie will be back. She's always coming back from somewhere, so we'll definitely have her back on the podcast again to hear about her next trip. But if you want to hear more, she has a ton of really great travel blogs on our website. You can find them at TravelStore.com and then just search for Katie's name. It's Katie Cadar, Cadar. You'll find some really cool ones there. She has ones from Colombia, Mexico, New Zealand. Anywhere you want to go, Katie has been there. We've got a lot of really great guests coming up with more really cool stories from around the globe. So stick around, find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll just keep getting you new stamps for your podcast passport. Thanks so much, everyone. And until next time, safe travels from everyone here at Travel Store.